everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast with Bobby Sylvester and Mike Tagliere. Our guest for the episode is Raymond Summerlin of Rotoworld.com. We're going to be talking about bounce back players today. Ray, Mike, how's it going, fellas?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess that's me. I'm doing pretty good. You said my name first. I guess I should have figured that one out. So aside from not being able to recognize audio clues, I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Tags?
I'm doing pretty good, Ray. I know we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and it's been a while since I talked with Ray, so I'm really looking forward to this. Ray's one of the nicest guys in the industry. We spent time in Washington D.C. together, and then we went to a baseball game afterwards, and that was all sorts of stories that I don't even know if we should share on the podcast, but it was a good time.
That's awesome. Do you guys have anything planned for the weekend?
I'm going to watch a lot of U.S. Open, hope to avoid the heat of Texas as much as possible, and see where it goes.
Yeah, we had to. So it's funny, on the last podcast, I mentioned that it was my anniversary last weekend, and people are like, well, Mike, why didn't you do anything more exciting than listen to 80s music like you said you did? And it's because we didn't have a sitter lined up for my little guy. So we have a sitter lined up for this weekend. So I think we're going out doing the whole dinner thing and spending some time. And then Father's Day, I believe that I am going golfing with a group of guys. So I am looking forward to that. How about you, Bobby?
We're going out to the lake with my family. My aunt and uncle have a lake house out on Lake of the Ozarks, and so we'll be doing that. And I usually don't like to travel. It's just kind of boring to me. I don't really care about culture. I mean, I love football and politics and
don't
theology.
Tell Ray that.
And
don't tell Ray that.
That's it. But my uncle loves to talk about football, so it should be a blast.
Ray used to be a teacher, right?
I was a teacher, but hold on, you don't love culture?
I've never been to a concert. I don't care. I don't think many movies are very good unless they're like super realistic and well done. So,
well, you mean like
I don't know.
Culture.
I mean, I don't like traveling and like seeing the way people live. Like, I just want to play fantasy football. You know what I mean? I don't like art or anything. Come on, fantasy football is art.
All right, Ted Kaczynski, you're just gonna be in a bunker somewhere in the forest. Leave me alone and let me mess with my spreadsheets.
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's going to be fun out there because I get to see my kids have fun, and that's like my favorite hobby. But yeah, man, usually I don't like to travel. So
that's crazy, Bobby. You know what's funny is that sounds like me back in high school. In high school, I tell my daughter now, if there was one thing I could go back and redo, it would be history class in high school, because I hated, I was fine with school. I just didn't like history class. I thought it was boring. I don't need to know what happened yesterday. I want to move forward. But now I want to learn about history. Like, Ray, that's when I was just talking about the Washington, D.C. trip. When I was out there, I was like a tourist and I loved it. I just looked at all the history. We went around and some of the museums they have out there. And that's stuff that really interests me now that didn't back in high school. And for those of you guys that know, Bobby is a grown man and he's telling you that he doesn't care about culture.
I mean, like, I love history, but I mean, I can read it in a book. I don't need to walk through a museum for 5 hours with smelly people all around me. You know what I mean?
This is the greatest start ever.
So speaking of DC, and I've been to lots of places. I think I've said this on multiple occasions to multiple people. I think on multiple podcasts, Paris is the greatest city in the world. And if you ever get a chance to go to Paris. And all of their museums are amazing. But speaking of DC, did you get the chance to walk into the top floor of the Library of Congress?
I did not.
Did you see that? Unbelievable. Next time you're back, everybody has to go do that. Bobby, go do that, and you will change your mind. It's unbelievable. It looks like, you're not going to get this reference because you don't like culture. It looks like the library out of Game of Thrones at the Citadel. It's really an amazing place, and I recommend it highly if you want to spread out, maybe past the confines of your woodland cabin and maybe see part of the rest of the world.
I'll read about it somewhere.
Fair enough.
Okay, so guys, we're going to be doing busts, and we're going to be doing bounce back players here today. But first, I want to tell you about the sponsor of today's show. We've been talking about them, pristineauction.com. We already gave away our signed Le'Veon Bell jersey to Andrew, who was listening in. There were actually a couple Andrews listening in who filled out entries into this contest. And so they were like, hey, was it me? Did I win? I feel really bad about that. But no, we did send it and contact the Andrew that did win. But y'all have another chance. We've got a T.Y. Hilton signed jersey to give away from pristineauction.com. All you have to do, go to iTunes, subscribe, leave us a review, screenshot that and send it to us at contest@fantasypros.com.
All right, guys, the sponsor for our show today, as Bobby mentioned, is PristineAuction.com. That is PRISTINE auction.com. They have daily auctions with hundreds of items up for grabs. With that being said, they have something for every team, including helmets, jersey, we know ones that I've talked about before. I have bid on the Amari Cooper one. I'm still waiting to hear back if I have won it yet. That was actually part of my Father's Day gift. This is what you guys can do for your fathers out there if they're big sports fans. Go on the site. All they're going to ask you to do, and that when you register, it's free. They're going to ask you how you heard about them. Let them know that Fantasy Pros sent you. That way we're able to do these giveaways constantly like we're doing, with the Le'Veon Bell jersey, with the T.Y. Hilton jersey. Who knows? Maybe next time we'll be giving away a helmet. So all we ask, even if you go there and don't even bid on anything, go look around, register, tell them the Fantasy Pros sent you. You can look through the items. They're all guaranteed authentic. They go through the most trusted sources, guys. I use the site personally. I have ordered 5 helmets from them, and it's going to continue to come for them because it's just an easy process. Go check it out. Bid on an item. You only pay if you win. Again, PristineAuction.com.
And I know some of you out there are thinking like, man, Father's Day's already coming up though, and like I haven't done anything. So if I order this, it probably won't be there on time. Just tell your father what you ordered him, and it'll show up on his doorstep, and he'll be just as happy. I mean, he's a dude. Like, he doesn't need it on Father's Day,
I have totally done that before for my mom or whatever. Like, I might buy her something for even Mother's Day and it takes longer than it was supposed to. And I have a picture of the receipt or whatever, and I show her basically what it is I got for her. And then when she gets it, it's nice because she's already gotten other things on Mother's Day, and then it's just like a week later she gets that, and everything's grand.
Yeah, so we've got bounce back players. We're going to start at quarterback. We all have one quarterback prepared. Tags, I want you to go first, and we'll move on to Ray.
You want me to go first? All right. So this one for me, I tried to go outside my confines here and like try and be different because I was going to go down and talk about Eli Manning, who is one that I do believe is going to bounce back, and I have some reasons, but I'm going to go with one up the charts a little bit. And it's because we don't really talk about these players that often because we all know they're studs and this and that, but I think Andrew Luck is a guy that I'm going to bet on bouncing back in 2017. And it's not to say that Andrew Luck, had a bad season in 2016. I mean, when you throw 31 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, it's hard to say that that's a bad season. But if you look at it, Andrew Luck was really, really like getting better every season until he had a shoulder injury, and then he tried to play through it, and he did well. He did fine. We'll say he's fine, but people aren't really putting him in the conversation with Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady atop of draft boards, and I don't really think that that's fair. I think that Andrew Luck is a guy that, he nearly had the best touchdown ratio of his career in 2016, and that was despite playing with an injured shoulder that required some surgery. Dante Moncrief was out for 7 games. His offensive line is an issue. It's always been an issue, but, it's been getting better slightly. The reason I like him so much, and the reason I think that he could have a 4,800 yard, 40 touchdown season, is because I think it could be like an Aaron Rodgers type season. They have a bad defense. I know that they brought in a bunch of middle tier linebackers this offseason, trying to rebuild what is a weak front seven. Their secondary, Vontae Davis wasn't great last year. They don't have a lot of good pieces, and they're still trying to build their defense. So it's a defense that's not going to be very good. So I'm expecting at least 620 pass attempts out of Andrew Luck. And honestly, he'll have a Moncrief who's in a contract year. He'll have T.Y. Hilton. And they also went out and got him Kamar Aiken. So I know it's going up the boards a little bit, but what do you guys think about Andrew Luck as a bounce back candidate?
I mean, if he's healthy, he might throw 40, 45 touchdowns, but I'm worried about that shoulder. These shoulder issues don't go away. What do you think about that, Ray?
Yeah, I think the biggest concern is it doesn't seem like the Colts, really know when he's going to be back. He hasn't started throwing yet. They've said, we don't really have a timetable for him to start throwing, which means he's definitely not going to be ready for training camp, the start of it. We'll see what happens. This has the look of an injury which is going to linger into the preseason, maybe make him questionable for week 1. I'm not ready to go that far. That's a big concern. But as you mentioned, this team, this offense is set for a breakout if everybody can stay healthy. The offensive line looks to be in much better shape. The left side is set. The right side with the Raven Clark, we'll see what he can do. Their running game, I mean, Frank Gore keeps on going. I'm not a big Marlon Mack fan, but we'll see what happens. Robert Turbin's there. They're going to get him a bigger role. So I think that this entire offense is poised for a breakout if the health cooperates, but I am a little bit worried about that shoulder.
It might be time to call Matt Hasselbeck or Kerry Collins back.
Oh, God. Please we all saw what happened with the Colts team when they played the Steelers on Thanksgiving. Remember that, right? That was awful. That just goes to show like how valuable someone like Andrew Luck is to that team and what he does for that team. I think some people have actually underrated Andrew Luck because coming out of college, a lot of people wanted to overrate him and say he was the next Peyton Manning, this and that. And then you had people coming out saying that this guy is being overrated, that we expected too much of him. I really don't think so. I think he is one of the elites in the game, and I think it's only a matter of time before that shoulder is okay. And I think that's the only thing that can really hold him back going into the season. But I have faith in that. I don't think it was a major shoulder surgery, so I think he should be okay. I look forward to seeing this guy for years to come.
You know, I look back at that playoff game where they were down 30 points and he single-handedly brought them back. That's who Andrew Luck is. If he's healthy, he's one of the 3-4 best players in the NFL as far as I'm concerned. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, he is a superstar. He just needs to be healthy, and it scares me to death.
Yeah, it's something that I'm legitimately worried about. It's the only thing that I'm worried about. I haven't moved him down my rankings yet, but if the news keeps going the way it's going and there keeps being this uncertainty, I mean, it's something I think we're going to have to start taking seriously pretty soon.
So, Raymond, who's your bounce-back candidate at quarterback?
Well, I didn't actually have a quarterback, but just off the top of my head, I would have to say that Blake Bortles is near the top of that list, and that seems crazy. But here's the thing about Blake Bortles. First of all, he finished, I think, as the quarterback 14. Again, it's off the top of my head. Quarterback 14 last year. So it's not like he was terrible. He was much worse, and a per game, that was a lot because he had to do played 16 games, other quarterbacks didn't. And the big concern for Bortles, I suppose, other than him, being terrible last year, the big concern for Bortles moving forward is going to be the lack of attempts. He threw 625 times last year. They've already said, in fact, Dave Caldwell came out today and said, I guarantee you he will throw less. I wouldn't be surprised if he attempted maybe 100 fewer passes. So all of this doesn't seem like I'm making a very good argument for Blake Bortles. But here's the thing about Bortles. The last time he really invested this time in the offseason and fixing his mechanics and going through and doing all of that, and when we really heard people say, oh yeah, this is good, it's right, like we're hearing this year, he went out and was a pretty good quarterback. I know a lot of it was in garbage time. I know he did have the attempts, but he was actually pretty good in 2015, put up a lot of numbers. And this team that's going to be run heavy, definitely going to be run heavy with Leonard Fournette, that could actually lead to Bortles being much more efficient than he's been in the past.
Yes, just like Dak Prescott.
Exactly. Well, I don't know about just like Dak, but yes.
Well, they're not the same player, but yeah, I mean, the way that Zeke helps Dak Prescott.
Absolutely. I just don't want people to think that I'm to say that Blake Bortles is as good as Dak Prescott, because I certainly don't think that. But what I do think is that this new offense can actually be good for him, help his efficiency. He has great targets in Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns and Marquise Lee. Tight end's not great. We'll see what happens. I actually think that Bortles is going to be a much better real quarterback this year and maybe a better fantasy football quarterback.
Hey, here's what it comes down to. You said 14 for his fantasy points. That's actually fantasy points per game. He was number 8 overall last year. He threw 625 passes. More than Aaron Rodgers, more than Kirk Cousins. The only people who threw more passes than him, Drew Brees and Joe Flacco. That's it. And he ran for 359 yards.
Yeah, I did a study this offseason in regards to what coaching changes mean and this and that. And Ray, you said it. And the fact that it's definitely in the realm of possibilities that Blake Bortles throws 90 fewer times in 2017. And that's not overstating it at all. That's a realistic possibility with bringing in Leonard Fournette. Granted, they do have the pass. Me with Bortles, okay, everybody knows that listens to this show, I am not a Blake Bortles fan. I don't think that he's going to be the starting quarterback in 2018. I don't think that's going to happen. But the fact that they didn't bring in someone this offseason, they didn't draft anybody, this is his team. And with the receiving options and with how bad he was last year, finishing as the number 9, number 8, whatever site you look at, wherever he finished, that he still has that team surrounding him. And Allen Hurns was dinged up for a lot of last year. Allen Robinson was one of the least efficient receivers in the NFL. So when you look at things, and it's like, Blake Bortles can definitely be a streamer. I talked about this with Sigmund Bloom on his podcast just yesterday, and the fact that I think that Bortles can be a solid streamer if you want to pair him with someone like a Tyrod Taylor, like an Eli Manning. I think if you catch them in the right matchup, it's the thing. My only concern, though, Ray, is that they are going to dip those pass attempts. Sure, he has the good options, but he's not going to get his rushing totals that he's been getting. Because if you look at last year, not many people realize Blake Bortles ran for, I think, 360 yards and 3 touchdowns, one of the highest rushing totals of all quarterbacks. he's not going to get those carries at the goal line anymore with Leonard Fournette on the team. They're still going to try and involve Chris Ivory because they're paying him a bunch of money. That was one of the worst contracts in all of free agency last year. I didn't understand it when it happened, but I have my concerns about Bortles, but I definitely understand where you're coming from in terms of his weapons that he has to throw to, and with them being healthy, with them trying to shore up the offensive line a little bit. I just have concerns about like I said, the running game and the fact that the defense is vastly improved, and we've even seen it starting over the second half of 2016.
I mean, think about it this way, though. Blake Bortles had more passing touchdowns than Russell Wilson, more rushing yards than Russell Wilson, more rushing touchdowns than Russell Wilson. He was right behind him in passing yards. He has better wide receivers, a much better offensive line, a better running back. Russell Wilson's being drafted as the 5th quarterback. Blake Bortles is being drafted outside the top 15. I'm not saying Blake Bortles is Russell Wilson, but I mean, it's a lot closer than 5 and 15.
I saw Bortles, I want to say his ADP was outside the top 20 right now. I think he's being drafted as like the 22nd quarterback. So that's why for me, he's essentially free. If you want to just stream him, that's fine. But yeah, I understand what Ray's saying this one.
I think that he's kind of like a prototype MFL 10 quarterback, because I think the concern that you're going to have with him, if they do become run heavy, and by the way, we've seen teams try to become run heavy in the past. The Saints come to mind a couple years ago, and it didn't work. So when saying that he's likely going to lose those pass attempts, that's not saying he's definitely going to lose those. So that's something you have to really think about with him. But projecting he's going to lose them, then he's going to have games where the Jaguars the defense is able to hold the other offense down. The Jaguars are able to run the football a lot, and he's going to have, a Derek Carr, 20 for 23, maybe not 20 for 23, but 190 yards and a touchdown. And that's certainly not going to be what you want from a fantasy perspective. But I do think he's going to have big games. The Jaguars are still going to Jaguar every now and again. And I think that in an MFL 10, something like that, he's in good shape. And like I said, the last time he had a really good season, we saw, and I'll mention this about another player in a second, we saw this exact trend in the offseason reports. Oh, he went and fixed his mechanics. Everything's going good. We didn't see those last year. So I think that there is reason to think that he can perform a lot better than he did in 2015. And if not, like you guys said, he's free. So what does it matter?
Is it not true that Bortles has a huge ceiling? I mean, he was the number 4 quarterback in his second year in the league. He was dealing with the shoulder issues last year. I know a lot of that was in garbage time, but I mean, we're drafting him like we know who he is. I think he has a pretty good ceiling.
I think that sometimes things get misconstrued in terms of who's a good quarterback in real life and who's a good quarterback in fantasy. And Blake Bortles, it goes no further than that. Like, you could end that debate with Blake Bortles, because if you've watched him play football, you know that he's not a very good quarterback. Now, I know
he's better than Eli Manning, though.
I would disagree with that. I'm not even a big Eli Manning fan, but Blake Bortles, honestly, honest to God, watching him last year, he was a bottom 5 quarterback in the NFL, regardless of what his stats say. Now, that's the thing. I'm a stat guy, but we talked about that, the fact that the attempts are way up there. We're talking about a defense that over the second half of 2016, I would argue that they were a top 12 defense at the second half of the season. Not only that, but they added A.J. Boye this offseason. They added Calais Campbell. They added Barry Church ended up signing there. So, they added these pieces that were dominant. Some of them were dominant. Calais Campbell's is a massive upgrade for their front seven. So when you add in these things, there are not going to be blowouts. I don't see any way that the Jacksonville Jaguars I would say that they're going to be a top half of the league defense this year. And I don't think that they get blown out in any game unless Bortles puts them in a situation with a pick 6 or something like that. Again, there are going to be some games where Bortles, and he does what he does. And that's why I'm okay with him as a streaming quarterback. He's just not a guy that you want to trust for top 12 production this year, is all I'm saying.
Andrew Luck went from 4,700 yards and 40 touchdowns with a 96 quarterback rating to, when he had shoulder issues, 1,800 yards in 7 games, granted, 15 touchdowns, only a 74.9 quarterback rating. He was one of the worst 5 quarterbacks in the NFL with Peyton Manning that year, and that's because he had shoulder issues. And then he came back and he was awesome again. 4,200 yards, 31 touchdowns, 96 rating. Same as before.
Bortles wasn't even good in 2015. He wasn't a great quarterback. He was a good fantasy
quarterback. He wasn't good, but he was substantially better than he was last year.
I would agree that he was better in 2015 than 2016. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Ray, do you believe in Bortles as an actual NFL quarterback?
No.
I don't either. I'm just saying he's going to be a lot better than he was last year. And last year he was number 8.
Yeah, and that's the deal. Like, there's room between being good and being better. And I think that offenses that are able to really rely on the run and really put defenses in bad situations with play action passing, improve the efficiency of even bad quarterbacks. And I'm not saying that Tyrod Taylor's a bad quarterback, but I think that that's a very good example of how play action can really help a quarterback. And so I think that even without him being quote unquote or hashtag good, that's the way we say it now, even with him being hashtag good, I think he could have improved efficiency simply because that team is able to, if that team is able to run the football like they want to.
Okay, guys, so what we're going to do with my quarterback is a little exercise. I'm going to tell you about two quarterbacks. You guys tell me which one you'd rather have, okay? Quarterback 1, 8,100 yards and 50 touchdowns with 33 interceptions and a 59.6 completion percentage over the last 2 years. Quarterback 2, 8,900 yards, 800 more, 61 touchdowns, 11 more, and 25 interceptions, 8 less, with a 62.2% completion percentage, almost 3 full percentages higher over the last 2 seasons. Okay? Now, quarterback 1 in the last 7 games last year only had 3 multi-touchdown games. Quarterback 2, 6 out of his last 7. And those were against the Vikings, Rams, Seahawks. Quarterback 1 did that, only 3 out of 7 against the Saints twice, Dallas, Carolina, the Logan Verrett-less Chargers. And quarterback 2, he did all this without a lot of pieces from his offensive line, including his best offensive lineman, and without his number 2 wide receiver. And in 2015, he was the number 5 fantasy quarterback ahead of Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers, who played the full season. So any guesses who these quarterbacks are? And I'm assuming you guys would rather have quarterback 2, right?
Quarterback 2 is Carson Palmer for sure.
Yeah.
Quarterback 1, is that Matthew Stafford?
Quarterback 1 is Jameis Winston, who's being drafted
close.
in the 8th round. Carson Palmer all the way back in the 12th.
Yeah, I mean that I think there is a when I was looking through the list, because like I said, for some reason I didn't have a quarterback. I was looking through the list. I was thinking, oh, who would I name? He was one I was looking at for sure. I know that Evan Silva on his team previews, doing a team preview series over at Rotoworld. I'd recommend you read them. They're great. He had a lot of good nuggets about Carson Palmer, and especially like you mentioned, how good he was down the stretch last year. We don't remember that. We remember him having a bad season. I remember the Miami game in which he was a disaster. I think he turned it over 4 times. But if you go over that last half of that season without John Brown, as you mentioned, with the offensive line struggling, then and in a pretty bad schedule, he was good. And I think there are reasons to think that he's certainly going to bounce back. I'd agree with that.
What do you think, Tags?
Carson Palmer is someone that intrigues me as a streamer for sure. You mentioned it. In 2015, his numbers were inflated, and he did pick it up over the second half of 2016. And it's really weird how it kind of worked out, right? Because over the first half, he had John Brown, he had Michael Floyd, he had Larry Fitzgerald and David Johnson all on the field at the same time, but he was not producing results. It's when they got rid of Michael Floyd, when John Brown started going down to 20 snaps per game, it's Carson Palmer turned into a better, a more reliable fantasy quarterback. And I think the reason is because he dumbed down the offense. He basically ran it through David Johnson. He
also wasn't playing hurt.
Well, can we really say that he was that hurt at the beginning of the season?
He looks like he was. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they're saying, but it sure seemed like it.
Yeah, it definitely looked like it. I mean, he missed the week. I'm looking at it. He missed week 5. He came back, and he still really wasn't himself for a couple weeks until he kind of got the ramp up in the Carolina game where he threw 3 touchdowns. And then from there on, he looked pretty good. I do recall the game that Ray's talking about. Everybody wanted to use him against the Miami Dolphins in week 14 for DFS, and he threw for 145 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. So he was not very good in that game. There was still a bunch of hit or miss. I mean, he was below 7 yards per attempt in 5 of his last 7 games. So he turned into a very much of a check down passer. Like he was running the offense through David Johnson. And for me, I don't think getting John Brown back is a bad thing. I think this is a good thing. Adding Chad Williams, I know he's a very unpolished product, and it was a weird draft pick. But at the same time, Bruce Arians has had a solid track record, so we have to kind of trust his process on this one. But Carson Palmer, the only thing I worry about is he done? Like they didn't really do much with the offensive line.
He's 37 years old. He might be.
Exactly, and like things can happen like this very quick. And Carson Palmer is the type of quarterback where I'm worried if he takes one hit, it might be over.
Especially with a guy, I mean, with his injury history, with his history with knee injuries. I agree with that. There is, obviously take off season fluff for whatever you want, but they are talking about his arm strength in mini camp and things like that. But he didn't throw for a little while, but now he's back throwing, and so well, I think he's going to be a wait and see guy for me. I'm going to see what he looks like. Does he look like, he has it, that he can really push the ball downfield? Are they able to do that? Or is their offensive line able to stand up with DJ Humphries at left tackle and Valdir moving to the right side? So there are lots of questions for sure on that offense. But yeah, I don't disagree with Palmer as a bounce back at all.
I think there's quite a bit of risk there, but I'll tell you, I would not be surprised if he finishes ahead of Matt Ryan this year in fantasy.
It wouldn't shock me necessarily. No, I don't think it. I think that they could finish around that same range, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's all pretty close in that QB 6 to QB 15 range, and
yeah, it's
I
really
think they
tight.
both end up in there. So, all right, guys, let's move on to running backs. Tags, who's your guy?
All right, running backs. I'm going with my guy Spencer Ware, and I know this is a lot of people are going to be shaking their heads at their radio or wherever you're listening to this right now. But Spencer Ware is a guy that he really didn't return from his concussion as the same player. He lost one of the best run blocking guards, Parker Ehringer. I always screw up the way I say it, but it's the basically one of their best run blocking guards. When he was out, Spencer Ware splits were different. But being in Chicago, Leonard Floyd, which was their first round pick in 2015, he came out this offseason and started talking about his concussion. He was being very open about it, saying that he really wasn't the same person. It took him 2 months basically to get back to who he was. He said that he'd be out there, he'd just forget things. He's like, I was able to go through the motions, but I wasn't the same player. So Spencer Ware, if you look at his splits before and after his concussion, it's like night and day. He played 6 games before his concussion. In those games, he was the number 7 running back in fantasy football, despite the fact that he scored just 3 touchdowns during that time. So he was doing it on carries, he was doing it on receptions and all that. Once he came back from his concussion, he averaged just 3.6 yards per carry. His yards after contact went down. His receiving totals were skidding a little bit. He wasn't getting goal line carries as much. Charkandrick West was more involved. I think there's something to this. Now, granted, they drafted Kareem Hunt, and there's really no way for me to escape that. But when I look at Spencer Ware, the running back he's been when healthy over the last 2 years, he was somebody that people were really excited about, including Andy Reid. I remember in the preseason last year, them using him on the goal line, and he was just a monster. So to see him last year finish with just 3 rushing touchdowns, we didn't see the real Spencer Ware. And like when I watch him, it's similar to a running back like CJ Anderson, another guy that I think could be a bounce back candidate, where these guys, they fight for every single yard. They're very physical running backs. So when something is a little bit off, it might affect him more than the rest of running backs. So number 7 running back pre-concussion. After concussion, he was the number 29 running back in fantasy.
And maybe they just drafted Hunt because they thought, well, sometimes when people get concussions, they get more and more and more concussions. So maybe it's just a backup plan. I remember Spencer Ware being awesome and everyone thinking, man, if Jamal Charles is gone for a long time, this is the guy to own. I mean, he would have been drafted in the top 25 overall last year if we knew Jamal Charles could miss the whole season. So Spencer Ware is a very talented running back in an Andy Reid system. So I'm buying that. I mean, I've had concussions, several concussions, and I'll tell you what, each one of them was worse than the worst flu I've ever had. I can't even imagine having a bad concussion.
Ray, where are you at on Spencer Ware, Kareem Hunt?
So I think the first thing I'd say about Kareem Hunt is I did like him a lot as a player coming out. So that is a big concern. But there is a possibility they view him more as a replacement for Charkandrick West than Spencer Ware. And that is within the realm of possibilities, at least early.
Interesting.
And the other thing I would say about Ware is you mentioned the concussion. Also, I would say the rookie wall, and I know he wasn't a rookie last year, but that was the first time he really came in and took a lot of work. And that is real. That is a real thing. The Chiefs talked about it, about how whenever the first year coming in and do that, a lot of players, they struggle with it. And we saw him kind of, hit that wall and say, all right, after this point, he was really bad. Well, maybe he was just worn down. Maybe the injury had something to do with it. I think that he had enough success over enough carries, both 2 years ago and last year, to say that he's a pretty good running back. And maybe the downturn we saw last year was because of factors outside of his control, or factors that are going to be different this year. And so him as a bounce back is certainly something I support. But the question will be, just like Palmer, what do we see in training camp? Is Hunt coming in and taking away early down work, taking away, most importantly, goal line work, or are we going to see Ware come in and maybe Hunt more in a passing game role? And that'll be the question. But if Ware is getting the work, I definitely agree that he's a bounce back candidate for sure.
Yeah, and Andy Reid doesn't really beat around the bush. I think that this is something that we're going to know in the preseason. I think we're going to know if Spencer Ware, Kareem Hunt's the starting running back, and Andy Reid is the type of guy that gives a workhorse carries. He's not going to divvy up the workload, say, hey, you get 40%, you get 30, and you get 20, whatever. He's not going to do that. Andy Reid wants somebody to carry the majority of the load, and it may have been, Ray, you mentioned a replacement for Charkandrick West. It may even been we need to replace Jamal Charles because he's no longer on our roster, guys, and we realized that we missed depth last year when Spencer Ware went down. So, I mean,
he loves depth.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. Whoever is starting in this backfield, you want them, but I think Spencer Ware is being a little bit undervalued just because of how he finished the season rather than the type of running back that he was before that.
That ADP is way too low if Spencer Ware is the starter, so you talked me into him here. Raymond, can you talk me into someone?
I hope not for your sake, but I feel like Doug Martin's name is going to be written on my gravestone.
Yes, that's my guy too.
I mean, I can't quit him. I really can't get away from it. Let me first say the 3-game suspension is a big deal, which hurts him in the rankings. But we have seen other guys with high end upside, and Martin has demonstrated high end upside. We've seen other guys with that kind of upside where their suspensions, especially the shorter suspensions at the beginning of the year, have been overvalued. Martin's not on Le'Veon Bell's level, but we saw that certainly last year with Le'Veon Bell, where even in the games he played, he was able to severely outplay his ADP. I don't know if Martin's going to do that, but Martin cost a lot less than even Le'Veon Bell did last year. And I think there's some mitigating factors, just like with Spencer Ware. I think there's some mitigating factors to what we saw from Martin last year. He was certainly dealing with something. That has become very clear. And by all accounts, he came into the offseason program like a muscle hamster on fire. Like he is ready to go. He is dominating these admittedly paddless practices. And I wouldn't probably put much stock into that, except that we heard the exact same thing in 2015 before his 1,400-yard season. In fact,
he finished third in fantasy points among running backs 2 years ago, guys.
Exactly. And we heard the exact same things before that season. They said that this was the best offseason of his career. That's a quote from before the 2015 season. So when these things recur and people had success after him, I kind of take note of them. And the most important point here for Martin is things are really ugly around his ADP. His MFL 10 ADP, the likes of, Samaje P. Ryan and Paul Perkins are there. I'll take a shot on Martin over P. Ryan for sure any day of the week.
So Doug Martin, I love it. And I've actually been working on player profiles for the past couple of weeks. And Doug Martin is someone who I started to do some research on. He's one of only 2 players over the past 5 years who has multiple 1,400-yard rushing seasons. Him and Adrian Peterson are the only players that have that over the last 5 years. So there's things going in his favor. And you definitely hit it right in the head when you said it reminds me of a couple of years ago when he was falling down after he had a rough year. And it was it the 2015 season, I want to say, where he was being drafted around that RB30 range. And then, the next year, of course, he's right back at the top. And that's why people are so down on him. They spent high equity to get him last year, only to be very, very, very disappointed. I was with you, Ray. I remember you clamoring for him to be a buy low. Basically, you're like, I'm living and dying by Doug Martin. And it just never really panned out.
And I died. Yeah, I died.
But honestly, if you look at Charles Sims last year, he kind of died too. So I think that the team as a whole, it was just a different organization. The way that the offense that Doug Martin is coming back to is also a lot better than it was when he left last year. He's not going. I'd be really curious to see the amount of 8-man fronts that he saw last year compared to what he's going to see this year with Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson, Chris Godwin, OJ Howard, like all these guys in the field at the same time. It's very likely that he's going to see 6- and 7-man fronts a majority of the time. And again, we're talking about a guy that has done it before. So I love it. It's just, here's my question though. How high are you willing to go, Ray? Because this is someone that like I said, I've been reading all these articles. I wanted to put him on a guy that's ADP was going to go up because people were going to start to realize what was going to happen with him once he returned. But he's all the way being drafted now at the number 20 running back. According to Fantasy Football Calculator, we mix that with ESPN, and sometimes they're hit or miss. But Doug Martin is the number 20 running back off the board right now, according to Fantasy Football Calculator, and that is in front of Joe Mixon and CJ Anderson. Would you take him over those guys?
No, I mean, I think Joe Mixon's a borderline running back 1, so no. CJ Anderson is in a similar spot. but no, because of the suspension. But I would say this time of year, I always use MFL 10 ADP if I can find it. And there are a couple good spots you can find it, because those are actually competitive leagues. And if you're going to be talking about, ADP, you're certainly, that's what I'm most interested in. And I own Doug Martin in a couple of MFL 10. So actually here, give me a second. I was able to get him in the 8th round, at the end of the 8th round.
That's crazy.
In an MFL 10 with, by the way, a lot of industry people. So it's not like this was a crazy, draft where it was just a bunch of, public people. There were a lot of people there who knew what they were doing. And he went after Paul Perkins and Adrian Peterson and those guys. Now, what I'm saying is you're probably right. It's going to go up. And how high to go? I believe I have him ranked 20, 21, something like that. And that's about as high as I'd be willing to go. But he's behind that list of questionable starting situations like CJ Anderson and Spencer Ware, simply because he has the questionable starter situation. We'll see what happens with Jacquizz Rodgers and with Charles Sims and with Jeremy McNichols. And also he suspended the first 3 games, so that moves him down. But I also think he has as much upside as those kind of guys.
Agreed.
His ECR right now is number 86. I would feel very confident taking him in the top 65. I would reach 20 picks to get Doug Martin. I mean, every single year there's these running backs who were former top 5 running backs in the league, and then they have one bad year and they're moved back to like 30, 40, and everyone's like, ooh, these guys are a great value. He's being drafted 75th right now, 75th overall. I guarantee you, even though he's missing 3 games, I'm telling you, he's going to be a top 12 running back.
It's going to be hard to sell the crowd on top 12, considering the fact that he's missing those 3 games. That's where it's going to be difficult to do that on a points per game basis. Would not shock me in the slightest.
And also because he burned everybody last. Like, that's
right.
The thing. I do a column every single year, post-hype sleepers. Doug Martin will be on it. I guarantee you that. And it's the deal. It's if you were burned the year before, people are unlikely to go back. And a lot of times those players tend to be pretty good values. A lot of times, by the way, they're just washed, and that's the end of it. But a lot of times they end up being pretty good value because of it.
All right, guys. Well, Doug Martin was my running back, so we're just going to move on over to wide receivers. And Tags, who's your guy?
Oh God, I've been banging the drum all off season. I'm going to continue to do so. I am attaching my name in the 2017 season to this man, and his name is John Brown. John Brown's a guy that people have kind of forgot about. He was drawing comparisons to Marvin Harrison just a couple years ago. That was kind of like his ceiling. Now, comparing somebody to a Hall of Fame receiver, that's a tough thing to live up to. But he's also a guy that finished. He was one of 3 wide receivers who finished in the top 24 in 2015, despite not seeing more than 105 targets. One was Doug Baldwin, one was Sammy Watkins, and the other one was John Brown. And in that season, that's when Michael Floyd was having a solid season. That's when Larry Fitzgerald had a great season. John Brown was doing this with those guys in the field. I think that we saw how much everything really affected him last year. Bruce Arians is the type of guy, if you miss practice time, he's not going to involve you in the game plan. We saw that a lot with John Brown. I mean, he went down to like 20 snaps a game. He ended up having to remove off his spinal cord. Dealing with the sickle cell thing. There were so many things going on with this young man last year that I really feel bad for him. Like, I'm happy to hear that they say that he's smoky on the field again. He's looking like his old self. He's living with Carson Palmer again, which is something that he did prior to the 2015 season. That type of stuff. I'm not going to put much stock in it, but it definitely cannot hurt. So for me, looking at Larry Fitzgerald, who's going to be, I think, 34 years old this year, Chad Williams, who's a very, as I mentioned earlier, an unpolished product. You don't want to run your offense through a running back. I know David Johnson wants the whole 1,000-yard receiving thing, but if John Brown, his splits, I'm going to do a profile on him soon, but his splits when he sees 6 or more targets are fantastic. I think John Brown is a candidate to see closer to 110, 120 targets this year. And if he does that, you're going to be talking about him as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy football next year.
I buy John Brown. So Raymond, I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I generally agree. I think that the medical issues he was dealing with last year were real. That was the problem. And I think if we remember back to this time a year ago, John Brown was a breakout candidate, very popular breakout candidate, one that I supported for sure. And if you look at the situation now, yeah, Carson Palmer's a year older. We talked earlier about him. We'll see what he's able to do and what happens with him. But Michael Floyd's not there anymore. Larry Fitzgerald's also a year older. JJ Nelson, I mean, I don't think that's somebody you're worried about. You mentioned Chad Williams, that there is room there for him to get targets. And like you mentioned, when he was getting targets his first 2 years, he was a very successful fantasy receiver. And he was also, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, if I'm remembering correctly, he was oddly used and successful in the red zone, which is something you would not expect for someone of his body type and skill set. But if they're going to continue to use him that way when he's healthy, especially, again, with Floyd gone, then that gives him more upside as well. So absolutely, he is a prime bounce back candidate.
Yeah, the crazy part about John Brown is that people look at him like he's a really, really small receiver, and he's not big. I'm not saying he is, but he's almost the exact same size as Antonio Brown.
But that's what makes Antonio Brown special.
It is. Like the man's a freak.
Like that's the thing. He's the exact same size as Antonio Brown, and that's why Antonio Brown is special. Because you don't generally expect those players to be able to do the things that that he can do. But I mean, there were people. I'm not gonna name names. There are people that have called John Brown. Oh, he's the next Antonio. I mean, the next Antonio Brown. So yeah, I think that comparison has been made, and he's able to, like I said in the red zone, I'm pretty sure that's right, that some of that stuff is interesting for someone at his size for sure.
That is interesting. I'll take a look at that, Ray, and I'll get back to you on that. But even looking at last year, there were just 4 games in which he saw more than 4 targets. And in those games, he totaled 70 yards, 144 yards, 54 yards, and then 81 yards and a touchdown. So those are very, very solid fantasy numbers of what you're looking for out of somebody that you're drafting right now as the 43rd wide receiver off the board. Me personally, I'm drafting him right around the wide receiver 30 range, wide receiver 30 to 32, right in there. I'd take him over someone like Corey Davis, who's going in that range all day long. I just think that the upside is there for more. You don't even have to spend a top 30 wide receiver pick on him. You could spend the 35 pick to ensure you get him and have upside for the top 20 wide receiver.
Yeah, it reminds me of Rashard Matthews last year, who was going for so cheap. And everybody knew, I guess not everybody knew, but you look at what he did in the last 8 games in Miami, and you thought he was probably going to be pretty special. He was the only guy there that we thought was going to get targets with Mariota, and he ended up pretty good at the end of the season. I think John Brown is very similar to that. I can't believe how late he's going right now. And I'd take both John Brown and Corey Davis on my team. Now, Raymond, it's up to you to give us your bounce back wide receiver. Please don't take my guy this time. Otherwise, I'm going to have to unfollow you on Twitter.
The worst thing that could ever happen to a person, being unfollowed. I like when people announce to you that they're unfollowing. Okay, champ.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that terrible?
Have fun. So I'm going to take Brandon Marshall. And I understand that being doubtful about Brandon Marshall makes a whole lot of sense. He's coming off perhaps his worst season of his career. He was consistently hampered by injuries. He turned 33 in March. He's joining a team with a clear number 1 receiver. All of those things are bad. So I completely understand why people are not particularly sold on Brandon Marshall. But I am interested in him as a bounce back because of opportunity. And again, I know that sounds crazy with Odell Beckham, but Sterling Shepard and Victor Cruz combined for 177 targets last season, even with Odell Beckham dominating 28.3% of the targets. One of those guys is gone, and it looks like Shepard's role is going to be maybe even smaller than Victor Cruz's because the Giants look set to use more 2 tight end sets, which are going to take a lot of snaps away from Shepard. I think Marshall is basically a lock for the 105 targets that Shepard saw last season. I think that it's possible Beckham sees a slightly smaller target share, which maybe helps Marshall get to the 120 range. And I think he's going to get the red zone work that we saw Shepard get last season. I think people forget Sterling Shepard scored, I believe, 8 touchdowns. So you put all that together, and I think that Marshall has a wide receiver 3 floor if he can stay on the field, and the upside for more if Eli Manning and that offense is able to bounce back.
Okay, I'm going to step in here before Tag starts railing on this. Last show, we were talking about Brandon Marshall. It was an episode about the first 2 rounds of the fantasy draft, like an in-depth look at the first 2 rounds. We spent 7 minutes talking about Brandon Marshall because I am huge on Brandon Marshall, okay? I love the guy this year. I don't care about all that. I mean, imagine if Odell Beckham goes down this year. How good can Brandon Marshall be? 2 years ago, he had 1,450 yards, 16 touchdowns 2 years ago. I love Brandon Marshall, so I'm just letting that be said, and I'm going to step back and let you two duke it out.
I'm not.
Go ahead, Tex.
So hold on a second. So Bobby and I, that was like one of the first big arguments Bobby and I have had on this show. Is like he's so adamant about that Brandon Marshall is a dominant receiver, and I've been a Brandon Marshall supporter for an awful long time. I will say that I was a big fan when he was in Denver, followed him to Miami, then he came to my Bears, and then with the Bears, you started to see a little bit of a decline. You saw a decline in his play. You saw Alshon Jeffrey emerging as the number one, kind of like a 1A, 1B situation, because I really don't think that Alshon Jeffrey is the alpha dog that you want in a receiver. But looking at it, you saw the Bears give up on a player that they saw declining. We saw him start to get nagging injuries. And then 2015 happened. Then everybody's like, oh, Brandon Marshall's back. Brandon Marshall's a king again. When we look at 2016 and how bad his season was, it was legitimately one of the worst seasons that I've looked at over the past 5 years. There's only been, over the past 4 years, Ray, there's only been 3 wide receivers who have finished with more than 120 targets, but finished outside the top 36 wide receivers. Those receivers are, it was Brandon Marshall last year. He finished as the number 52 wide receiver, as a matter of fact, so he wasn't even close. But the only other 2 were Vincent Jackson and Andre Johnson. Those are 2 players who are out of football. That was the last season that you kind of saw them get that big target number that they did because people started to notice they hit that age barrier. Brandon Marshall is actually at that exact age that I think Vincent Jackson was that year. I think he's a year older than Andre Johnson was. And now he's going to a team where it's similar to Vincent Jackson and Andre Johnson. Andre Johnson had an opposing number 1, DeAndre Hopkins, that helped bring him down. Then he went to the Colts, which is something similar to Brandon Marshall this season. It's, people were drafting Andre Johnson as a top 24 wide receiver when he went to the Colts. Well, they had T.Y. Hilton. Dante Moncrief ended up scoring more fantasy points than he did. This is a situation where I think that we're letting our fandom and our memories of Brandon Marshall get the best of us, where in reality, he's a 33-year-old wide receiver that's coming to start in a brand new offense, and there is an alpha dog on the team in Odell Beckham. You're not going to take away targets from Beckham to feed him. They drafted Evan Ingram, who is, by the way, he's not a tight end. I don't care if they say it's 2 tight end sets. You're running a 1 tight end set and putting Evan Ingram in the slot as a receiver because he's not a blocking tight end. He's basically Jordan Matthews with a tight end tag. So for me, I think Sterling Shepard could turn out to be the value. But here's the thing, Ray. People were so in love with Marshall. We saw him once he was traded to the Giants, being drafted around that wide receiver 20 range. It started to come down to the point where I'm not necessarily opposed to him because, we know what's inside this guy. Can it happen at 33 years old? I don't know if Brandon Marshall, the type of beating that he took in his yards after the catch, I don't know if he could be that guy again. But for me, I would need him to fall outside the top 30 for me to draft him because I think that there's too much risk associated with him at his advanced age. It has nothing to do with his past performance because I was a huge Brandon Marshall fan. I just think that sometimes it's better to get out a year early than out a year too late.
And I would first of all say my biggest concern with Brandon Marshall is those injuries. That's the concern. Is if those concern at his age, if they continue to nag, that is a problem. You mentioned the 2 guys, Vincent Jackson and Andre Johnson. What's interesting about those 2 guys is in the seasons you mentioned, they also had quarterback problems. They had Andre Johnson actually had Ryan Fitzpatrick as his quarterback in that year in a fun turn of fate. And Vincent Jackson, I believe, had Josh McCown's terrible Tampa Bay year and maybe some of Mike Glennon that year. So saying that, I think when you look at wide receiver efficiency, it does have something to do with the wide receiver. I think a lot of it has to do with the quarterback. And when I'm looking at these, terrible years of wide receiver efficiency, a lot of times it has to do with the quarterback. And that's something that, unless you're talking about Devontae Adams 2 years ago, that I don't know how much stock I put in that. But I do think what you say is interesting about Andre Johnson going to Indianapolis, because that is a very comparable situation. Do we think that Sterling Shepard is on the same level as Dante Moncrief? Maybe he is. Do we think that Marshall's going to get those nagging injuries and have that problem? Maybe so. I think that those are both very good arguments. But what I would say is, I don't know that Brandon Marshall was bad last year. I think that Andre Johnson, his last year in Houston, was. I don't think Brandon Marshall was bad last year as much as the situation was terrible. And if he's healthy, huge if, I think that he's going to be the number 2 receiver clearly. And if he's going to get those targets, I'm going to put some faith in him with a hopefully competent Eli Manning at quarterback.
Yeah, that's another issue that we could talk about on a different day.
Eli's just not very good either.
Yeah, that's another big concern. I agree with it. There are concerns. Nobody would say there's not. But again, you're not paying for
a top 10 wide receiver, right?
Top 10 wide receiver, and there are going to be concerns, all the way down the board once you get to his range.
No, I hear you, man. It's just one of those debates that it's fun to have because Bobby and I are on complete opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and we usually agree a lot. I mean, the great thing here is Raymond's been bringing up players that I love this whole episode, and it's just really, it's driving my fight against you, Tex. It really helps out.
Who is your wide receiver, Bobby?
My wide receiver. Okay, guys. What if I told you last year's number 11 wide receiver in fantasy points per game and number 14 the year before is being drafted as the wide receiver 37?
You talking about Stephon Diggs?
That guy.
Stephon Diggs?
It's not Stephon Diggs. It's Eric Decker. People have forgotten just how good this guy was because of his injury. I know he's not on a team yet, but whichever guy signs him is going to get a very good wide receiver. They're going to use him a ton in and out of the red zone. I love him to bounce back from his injury. He's going to help fantasy teams. He's going to help real life teams. He's the real deal.
Eric Decker, man. Like, this guy is never going to die. I'm pretty sure that Eric Decker just will never go away.
He's
Eric
like 29.
He's 30 now. But at the same time, doesn't he feel like he's like 90? Like, he went back to the Tim Tebow days. Like, that's when basically he started playing like with the Broncos when Tim Tebow was there. But it just seems like he's like the oldest veteran, even though he's only been in the league. I'm looking at it right now. 7 years. And he's only been really playing for 6 years, which is just crazy. Decker seems like he's old, like he's like an old veteran, but he's a great touchdown scorer. My concern for him is if he signs with Tennessee, which seems like it is looking very, very likely to happen. I know his wife is.
He's going to Baltimore.
No,
he's going to Baltimore with Macklin.
Don't say that. Macklin is a perfect fit there. I actually like Macklin. We'll talk about him a different day. But I think Decker's signing with Tennessee, but what does that really do for him? Like, Ray, are you interested in Eric Decker if he signs with Tennessee?
I actually moved him way down when Macklin signed in Baltimore. I was going to be excited about whomever signed with Baltimore,
yes,
and I thought it was going to be Decker. I really did. And when it was Macklin, I think that really hurt Decker's chances. Buffalo, that's not a great situation, especially with Sammy Watkins. Keep every finger you have crossed, looking like he's coming back to health. That's not a great situation in a team that's not going to throw that often. Tennessee, they drafted a wide receiver in the first round and the third round. They have Rashard Matthews. They have Delaney Walker. They have a new tight end, Jonnu Smith, which I think is going to take a couple years, but they drafted a lot of weapons. I don't know where that fit is. I just don't know where he comes in and is all of a sudden the almost number one receiver, which I think he would have been in Baltimore. So if Baltimore was happening, absolutely, I'd be 100% in. As it stands now, with all of this uncertainty, I don't see a path to him being the getting the targets that I think he's going to need to really be a great fantasy option.
He's never been the number one guy, though. I mean, he's always been behind Brandon Marshall, Demarius Thomas, all these guys.
Yeah, that's a good
point. He was always great.
Yep, and I mean, I think it's more about with him. It's more about red zone targets, which is somewhere he's been successful his entire career, and especially we remember 2 years ago in New York when he just, I think, did he score a touchdown in every game or almost every game? It was incredible. Yeah, it was incredible how many touchdowns he scored. So I that would be the concern. Is he going to find someone that as a team that is going to give him the red zone targets? And if he does, then I'm going to be much more interested. But I don't know what that team is right now, or which team that is at this point.
I'd like to see him go to Miami.
That's crowded there, man. That is crowded.
And does he fit? I mean, there's concerns about if
there's
Jarvis
lots of
Landry
mediocre
fits.
pieces, but are you telling me that Eric Decker wouldn't be the best wide receiver on that team?
Devontae Parker's going to take over this year.
You think so? Okay, I would rather have Eric Decker than Jarvis Landry or Thomas.
I'll take him over Landry. I mean, but the thing is, they're different players, so I don't really want to compare the two. But yeah, I think Miami is already set. They signed Stills, having Parker expecting a big thing there. Jarvis Landry, they have their 3 wide sets figured out, and you're not going to sign Decker to back up.
By the way, when I said Thomas, I meant Parker, everyone. So
and how many times is Miami going to throw this year? I mean, you're signing up for a guy on a team that you'd be happy if they threw 500 times. So
that's a good point. Okay, I take it back. I don't want him to sign with Miami.
Before we end the show, let's get a tight end real quick. Ray, who's your tight end that you expect to bounce back?
I don't know if a player who has never broken out can bounce back, but I'm going to go with Eric Ebron. I think he's going to outplay his per game numbers from last year. And the biggest thing working in his favor, and Jim Caldwell said it when the day that we're recording this, said that he doesn't anticipate Anquan Bolden coming back. That is huge for Eric Ebron, who, when he was on the field last year, saw 16.7% of the targets. But when he and Bolden were on the field, were running routes together, he only saw 12% of the targets. Bolden was
great stat.
Bolden was a big detriment to him last year, both just in between the 20s and especially in the red zone. They don't really have that weapon anymore. Ebron can be that. They signed some block first guys. Darren Fells, they drafted a block first guy, and Michael Roberts. I think there's an avenue here for him to get 100 targets if he can stay on the field, which might as well just be written on his player card if he can stay on the field. But I do think there's a path here for 100 targets for him.
Yeah, Ebron was my guy that I had down for it as well, so you and I are in sync on this one. Most people don't know that he finished with the 8th most yardage among tight ends, and that's despite playing just 13 games. If you would extrapolate his numbers over those 13 games into a full 16-game season, he would have been number 4 in yards among tight ends behind just Travis Kelce, Greg Olsen, and Jimmy Graham. So, when you're projecting tight ends, what you're looking for is targets, and he's going to get those. They were there last year. He got 85 targets in his 13 games, so they're going to be there. He's going to score more touchdowns. He's not going to score any more rushing touchdowns, unfortunately. But Eric Ebron is a guy that, I think that if you get him as your tight end 1 in one of the later rounds, I think you should be more than okay with that.
Agree. Yeah, he was super consistent last year, and a lot of people didn't realize that because he was just hurt so much. But, I think they're going to use him in the red zone more. He's definitely got the skill set for the red zone, so he's probably the guy I would have come up with, too, for a bounce back.
Love it.
That's probably not a good thing, actually. All of us being in agreement probably means we're definitely wrong.
So I'll just say I would rather have Jack Doyle, but Eric Ebron's a close second.
Okay, well, you're wrong, so let's just clip that out of the show.
I don't know. I'm torn on Doyle. I get it. I understand completely, but a lot of weapons in that offense now. So I guess we'll have to see what happens.
Especially Eric Swoop.
Oh, Eric Swoop, yeah.
I like them both. I really do like them both for MFL 10s. I've been drafting Doyle and Swoop on the same team because one of them's going to get a touchdown every game, right?
Pretty much.
All right, guys. Well, that's all we have for the show today. Raymond, it was awesome having you on, as always. Hoping to have you back soon.
Absolutely. It's fun, guys. Anytime.
Thanks. And for those of you listening at home, make sure to sign up for the T.Y. Hilton signed jersey giveaway from pristineauction.com. And if you haven't already, check out their website for a good Father's Day gift. For Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening, and enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.